Hello, I'm Oli Brew, Head of Client Success at CyberCube. We've recently published a report called Viruses, Contagion and Tail Risk, Modeling Cyber Risk in the Age of Pandemics, a comparative study and look at how pandemic risk modeling and cyber risk modeling are similar and different in ways that we look at these modeling issues. And I'm delighted to be joined by Nita Madhav, CEO of Metabiota. Nita, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Oli. I'm Nita Madhav. I'm the CEO of Metabiota. And at Metabiota, we're working to make the world more resilient to epidemics. And we've been doing this for over a decade. And the way that we're doing this is by enabling countries and governments and companies to mitigate and manage their epidemic risk by providing data and analytic tools, as well as on-the-ground expertise.
Fantastic. So when we were discussing the report, what would you say are the main similarities between modeling pandemics and cyber risk when it comes to addressing the insurance issues around accumulation risk?
It's a great question. And I think a way that we often think about pandemic modeling is that we have a global network that connects the entire world. And what happens is you get a threat that emerges in a location, and then that propagates around the system. And when it comes to cyber risk, there are many parallels to that type of framework. When you think about the global network of computers, a virus that emerges can also spread across that network as well. And so I think that one of the biggest parallels is in how the system propagates a threat and how it can be contained, because a lot of the containment efforts are around human interventions, mitigation efforts, trying to create systems that are resilient or can prevent the intrusion of viruses. And in many ways, it's the same thing that we also aim to do in public health.
Great, and certainly one of the similarities we experienced is the challenge in collecting accurate and meaningful data. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree that. And when it comes to the public health data, it's actually surprising how sparse the data set can actually be when you really drill down into it. Certainly with the COVID pandemic, we now have a very significant amount of data that has emerged as a result. And certainly we'll be looking at that and taking key learnings away from that and using that as far as updating models and building, kind of pushing the science forward in this area. But prior to COVID, the data sets that were around epidemics and pandemics really required a lot of manual intervention and efforts to structure this data, which in fact we spent quite a bit of time the past 5 years actually building out this data set together from many different sources, both official and unofficial.
That's great. And tell me, what about some of the key differences? Where would you say there are divergences in the way we think about pandemic and cyber risk models?
I think, to me, as having a background in epidemiology and ecology, I often think about the way that epidemics and pandemics emerge. Many of them arise from animals that jump, into humans and then start to spread. But there are natural drivers of these. Certainly, there are human elements as well when it comes to coming into contact with these animal reservoirs. But when I think about cyber, it seems to me that a lot of the origins of the risk is really more human driven. It's really based on how, a lot of times bad actors are behaving and trying to, cause these events to come about. Whereas certainly the risk exists with something like bioterrorism, but right. For the most part, these are naturally occurring pandemics that are occurring.
Anita, tell us about how these models can provide value and a role in the supporting of managing systemic risk at a societal level.
I know that in our report, we discussed how both pandemics and some really large cyber events could be seen as systemic risks. And I think it's worth noting that there's a significant amount of events, first of all, that are more contained and are not systemic risks. So I think that that's one really important point. But then some of the larger events, yes, do fall into that category of being systemic risks. And I think for those, the modeling tools that are developed here can actually be helpful for developing these public-private partnerships that there's been a lot of discussion about of late, especially with respect to pandemics, by helping to really determine where which types of events make sense for the private markets versus which ones would make sense to be covered by a part of the public market.
We're delighted to work with Munich Re and yourselves to share these insights in this paper. So tell me, Nita, why is it so important, do you think, for the insurance industry to work together with modeling companies such as yourselves to help improve the solutions that they're building?
Well, I think modeling offers a great deal of insight and tools that insurance companies, carriers, brokers, and risk holders can all use to quantify their risk. And when we're looking at something like epidemics and pandemics, where there really are a lot of gaps in the historical data set, then modeling really helps both to fill in those gaps as well as to look at what the potential is in the tail, because certainly while the COVID pandemic has been very significant, it's only one representative of what could occur. And there, in fact, are many other types of events that could occur that are actually worse than COVID. And so modeling offers these tools that can be used, and insurers that we've partnered with have used it both in developing structures for different types of policies, especially to cover business insurance losses, and also to feed into their pricing algorithms to figure out how to better structure to avoid accumulation risk. So there are many things that modeling can help with when it comes to the insurance industry.
Fantastic. Nita, thanks so much for your comments. And I certainly agree that both managing capital risk, addressing reinsurance issues, and of course, addressing accumulation risk is a key part of how we think about models and their utility within the industry. So Nita Madhav, CEO of Metabiota, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you, Oli.